Well, Dune, Part 1, is a slow-burn sci-fi epic drama that presents fantastical alien worlds and reminds me of Jesus. Stick around and I will explain. I'm Paeter from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Dune, Part 1. The synopsis on IMDb reads, a mythic and emotionally charged hero's journey, Dune tells the story of Paul Atreides, a brilliant and gifted young man born into a great destiny beyond his understanding. Paul Atreides tells the story of... Sorry, I'm getting distracted because, of course, as soon as I started recording, that's when the people with the blowers start coming around my window outside. Dune tells the story of Paul Atreides, a brilliant and gifted young man born into a great destiny beyond his understanding, must travel. I think they mean to say who must travel to the most dangerous planet in the universe to ensure the future of his family and his people. As malevolent forces explode into conflict over the planet's exclusive supply of the most precious resource in existence, a commodity capable of unlocking humanity's greatest potential, only those who can conquer their fear will survive. All right, so I haven't read the books, the Frank Herbert series, any of it. Well, I did try one chapter a long time ago. The prose just was not connecting with me, a little too dry or describing doorknobs or something, I don't remember. But I enjoyed both the 1980s movie and the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries from like early 2000s, late 90s, I can't remember. Anyway, this version has much of the dark visual vibe of the 80s movie, but takes time to let the story breathe like the Sci-Fi miniseries. Although maybe breathe a little too slowly, a little too deeply at times. Even giving myself an intermission at 90 minutes in, I found the last hour of this like 2.5 hour long movie to drag a little bit for me. But despite that, I'm impressed with how the writing and direction takes a fairly political story and made it about people for me. The main character, Paul Atreides, is at the center of political turmoil and is also a figure of prophecy in more than one religion of sorts, but they gave time to moments that reminded me that he's a son with a dad and a mom who love him, as well as other relationships that have their own dynamics that I can relate to. There's plenty of world building and exposition that has to happen, but it felt more natural to me in this script than in the previous two adaptations of the novel. And the world, its people, and culture were still really interesting to me, even though I've seen two other versions of this story before. Now, regarding those times where the film lets itself, quote-unquote, breathe a little too much, it's not that they felt overindulgent to me. It's not a movie with long shots of nothing happening that's just like, look at this beautiful cinematography. It doesn't feel like that to me, but it's also not, filled with action or suspense. It's an epic sci-fi drama with some scenes of action and some scenes of suspense, but it's a drama, and it's best to be prepared for that going in. Even so, I think it would work better as a premium streaming miniseries with episode breaks that each build to a peak of tension before the end of that episode, like they do at the end of this movie, using music and foreshadowing to give significance to where the story ends, while also letting us know we definitely want to see what's going to happen next. Leading us to ask the questions, oh, I wonder if this is going to happen. What's going to happen, The actual plot point the movie ends on is not much more monumental or significant than a number of other moments earlier in the movie, but they lend its significance in how they tell that story moment. So I would have preferred they use that technique to divide this movie up into 2 to 3 episodes that each end with a similar feeling. As it is, by the last hour, I felt like the drama had sort of hit a plateau and just kind of stayed there at a flat line for too long. As far as the cast and the performances go, I really, I liked all the casting here. Timothée Chalamet is doing his usual quiet, haunted thing that he does in, I think, everything I've seen him in. But he also has nice emotional access and vulnerability that do help me to connect with him, and his ability to do that hasn't gotten old to me yet, despite seeing it in many of his previous performances already. Jason Momoa and Josh Brolin are really likable adult friends and mentors for Paul. Oscar Isaac has both the dignity and affectionate fatherly warmth that I think his character calls for. Rebecca Ferguson is great as both a formal and composed lady of the court, as well as the broken and worried mother and companion when her family is in danger. Zendaya doesn't do much as Chani in this movie, Paul's love interest in the story, if you're not familiar with it. So the jury's out for me on her casting until I can see a lot more of what she does with her role in Part 2. As far as the stunts and visuals go, not a lot of stunts to talk about. As I said, it's not really an action movie. although different visually from the 80s movie, the design of the world, its creatures, its vehicles, its costumes, its gadgets, is still a big selling point for me, and really kept my interest in partnership with what the script was doing to build my sense of intrigue about this world and how it works and what the beliefs are and the social structures are and stuff like that. The visual design has a serious, almost ominous feel to it, to really everything. And while I think I still prefer the slightly more bizarre designs in the 80s movie, the look of this movie carries much of the same spirit, I think, despite not being as bold, seemingly, in its choices. The visual effects are all, solid industry standard and leave me with no complaints. However, I just want to mention there seems to be a softness to the focus. I would be interested what other people think of this that have seen the movie. Just the visual clarity, the sharpness of the image in throughout the whole movie. I noticed this most in wide shots where people are seen from a distance, which the movie does often to kind of convey scope. So that might have been something that was bringing it out. I wondered if I was just imagining it, maybe because they used more shots like that than other movies might. I was watching through HBO Max on a 4K display, and probably about, 55-inch screen, and I double-checked to make sure that it wasn't happening with all streamed content on the service. The difference was not as big as I thought it would be when I checked and was watching a little bit of the TV show Titans, but it was still slightly better in Titans than it was in this movie. So it may have been the type of film used or an intentional choice in focusing the lens. I mean, I still allow for the possibility that there was something going on with the streaming itself, but I don't think that was the case. But I would have liked the whole thing to be a little bit sharper. Again, I'd be interested to hear if anybody else noticed anything like that. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, Paul Atreides is obviously a Messiah figure, and so comparisons to Jesus, I think, are going to be natural. Fictional messiahs are sometimes seemingly used to express a writer's beliefs about Jesus. It's a popular notion to think of Jesus as a good person, but one who would have been humbly, of course, unsettled at the thought of people worshiping him. We see Messiah figures in movies often have their humanity, humility, and self-demoting attitudes emphasized, despite characters around them viewing them with reverence that makes them uncomfortable. Now, that's not quite where this movie goes. Paul is definitely uncertain, but there comes a point where he does seem to begin embracing the fact that he has a very elevated purpose and destiny, and we'll see kind of how that's portrayed in part 2. But watching this movie, my mind drifted to Jesus a few times and how my understanding of his humanity has changed since I was a kid and first kind of aware of the concept of the incarnation and kind of what Jesus really was in his pre-resurrection life. And I at first just kind of assumed for a while in my younger years that Jesus was almost a sort of disguise for God the Son, where he actually always knew everything and could do anything anytime he wanted, but just chose not to most of the time. That extreme view may seem to honor his divinity, but it dishonors his humility and also disregards Scripture, which describes Jesus as learning, both as a child and later on as an adult. In the last 10 to 20 years, I've come to understand the more nuanced reality of who and what Jesus was before his resurrection. Of course, there's a ton of stuff about the nature of his incarnation that nobody has figured out, but it seems more likely than not that he learned through Scripture, through thinking and discerning through things. I think it's more likely than not that he actually learned of his divine identity rather than kind of having this light bulb, revelation just given to him by God the Father. It seems very sensible to me that he would kind of piece things together based on his family line, the circumstances of his birth, what's going on in prophecy in the Old Testament. I think he could have put it together that way. And his knowledge being limited, he had to grow in understanding and also had to trust God with the details of day-to-day life and his ministry that he was ignorant about. He was fully God, but in some way compartmentalized so that he was also fully human and had the complete human experience with all its limitations and problems. And so even as I still struggle with feeling at times like God is distant and indifferent much of the time, I take some comfort from who he became and how he lived as Jesus. He is not removed and kept safe from the kind of pain and problems that I feel and that you feel. He fully entered into and exposed himself to that, forever identifying himself in this sense as human alongside us, and still does, a resurrected, glorified human, which believers that trust in Jesus for forgiveness are also going to become, but still fully human, which is staggering to think about, that he entered into time and committed himself to investing lovingly in humanity and identifying with humanity in such a striking, shocking, mind-boggling way, and still being fully God. I mean, that's there's no other worldview of God that has him so loving and yet still fully God at the same time. And because of that, it's really something to think about. And this movie helped me to return my thoughts to that for a little bit. So I certainly thought that was worthwhile. Okay, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Paeter. Okay, you can wait for Redbox on this one, or when it's stacked with other things that you want to watch on HBO Max, and then watch it like 45 to 60 minutes at a time, and then put it down and come back to it the next day, and be prepared to just kind of soak in a world rather than be riveted or blown away. It's not something you're going to be emotionally invested in the way that maybe you might like fully, but you will be invested in the characters, and you'll certainly be interested in this world and its characters. In the meantime, see if there's any word on that elusive extended version of the 80s Dune movie available somewhere on Blu-ray yet. Feels like that's never going to happen, but it's maybe worth checking one more time today. This one's rated PG-13 for sequences of strong violence, some disturbing images, and suggestive material, and those are all of my thoughts on Dune, Part 1. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, and click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get more info about the benefits of becoming an insider at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. Then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all kinds of CGC content at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.